Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rewatch Project with Hannah and Mike. I am Mike, and with me, as always, is Hannah. How are you this evening, darling?
I'm very well. I'm ready to get into some B5 and have a nice evening.
Alrighty, so we're covering the 8th, I want to say,
Yes,
episode of season 1 of Babylon 5. Tell us a little bit about this episode, Hannah.
this episode is called "And the Sky Full of Stars." Synopsis says Sinclair is kidnapped by two men who want to know what happened to him when he disappeared in the final battle of the Earth-Minbari War, something that even Sinclair does not know.
Compelling.
It is directed by Janet Greek and written by JMS.
So this sounds like it's a part of the show mythology.
I would say definitely not a Monster of the Week.
No, sounds that way. Quick bit of housekeeping before we get onto that, though. Just a reminder that we do appreciate feedback, which you can send us at rewatchprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can leave comments right here on the channel. Do check out the other stuff on this channel, the film, television, music, and other pop culture-related goodness that cohabits with this podcast. And also, likes and subscribes, very much appreciated, as subscriptions result in more people finding the channel, which results in more feedback and conversation, which is ultimately the primary motivator.
It's what we're here for.
It's what we do on our watch. And also, we would appreciate donations via PayPal if you can afford to do so without causing yourself any financial hardship, because we certainly do not want that. So with all of that in mind, Hannah, do we have any feedback?
Yes, we do. Okay, so our regular feedbacker, Mike's Musings.
Mm-hmm.
On our last episode, The War Prayer, they mention in one episode that the communication device is some sort of molecular bonding based on the wearer's DNA.
Space glue.
So the links stick and are only supposed to work for that individual, although they break that rule once or twice during the series. For anyone who hadn't watched the previous episode, I did wonder about
speculating about
how they
that.
stay on.
Yeah, Space Velcro was my guess.
He then goes on to say, I feel like most TV today is about the spectacular and not about the story. Not like all TV back then was about stories, but it was more important. It was a more important part because of the lower quality viewing experiences.
Well, I think
that's very true.
I talk a lot on the Doctor Who episodes that I do that up until, prestige TV, sort of post HBO TV, I think the big fundamental difference was that television was still very much an offshoot of radio, more than it was an offshoot of film. Whereas now television or streaming feels like an offshoot of film.
Yeah.
And I think that television always had more in common with radio and theatre than it did cinema, weirdly enough. The medium that on the surface it has the most to do with, but the way that people consume television is a lot more like how people would have consumed radio than film. Because it's in your living room. It's something often that people will consume whilst multitasking. Whereas if you're watching a film, at the cinema, it holds your entire attention. And I think that that's something that.
Well, you hope it does. At least.
Well, yeah. But I think that's one of the things that's changed is that now that spectacle element is there. Whereas before it was much more, if you think about soap operas, they came from radio, the Archers and all of those kind of things. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Mike's Musings.
Good stuff. Thanks, buddy.
We also have feedback from FSM Dog. Something that has come from film, let's fill the screen with eye candy so you don't notice the lack of story. TV with lower budgets couldn't do that, so needed more character parts to talk about the things they couldn't afford to show.
And again,
very true.
Just to go back to that radio comparison, radio couldn't show you stuff. So you had to have character and dialogue and investment in narrative. And television often couldn't show you stuff because of budget, so it's the whole necessity is the mother of invention. When you can do anything and you've got no limitations. I mean, the example I always love is the Brian De Palma film, The Untouchables, where originally there was going to be this big action sequence where they were running along the roofs of trains and all this kind of stuff. But there was a problem, they couldn't do it. So they ended up coming up with that Odessa step sequence, with the stroller going down the steps in slow motion during the shootout. That's the bit of the film everybody remembers, you know, because they had to be creative because they couldn't do whatever they wanted. Whereas they just CGI that shit now.
And the common example is Jaws.
Well, yeah, the barrels,
If the shark had worked, it would have been less a film. Yeah. Thanks very much. Right, we also have feedback from Neighbourhood Cat Lady 6094.
That's a great name.
Love it. Was a big fan of Babylon 5 when it previewed. The acting and character arcs are outstanding. Fully agree with you.
I think that's really the big draw of the show in retrospect.
We also have feedback from the coolest of cool daddies. My personal B5 journey started back in college. I worked at a computer store that sold Commodore Amiga.
Wow, that's the perfect job for a Babylon 5 fan in the 90s, that is. I'm jealous.
We heard they were using them to do this new sci-fi show. When The Gathering came out, we had it playing non-stop in the store.
That's brilliant.
By the time the show started in earnest, I was already hooked. I watched it religiously every week. Mum had her soaps. This was mine. I got all my friends hooked on it.
That's great because Amigas are their retail hardware, but the effects for Babylon 5 were done on. So, I mean, that was one of the great things about it that appealed to geeks was you could do it yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you were watching something that conceivably you could make. And for geeks whose fandom often extends to, fan fiction and whatever, that's tremendously appealing. So, God, working in that environment back then and having friends who were into the show, that must have been an awesome experience. And I mean, I think that goes back to what that might have been. There was a bit of a call to action in the last episode of saying to listeners and viewers what their experiences were of watching the show. Because for me, a big part of going back and rewatching shows is remembering just the social experience of watching something for the first time and
how it fit into your life and your friends.
And I think that, particularly Babylon 5 came out during a really interesting era of fandom when the internet was just starting. And it was very much, along with the X-Files, it was very much on the vanguard of fandom in that regard.
He goes on to say, I thought Hannah was about to break into some Depeche Mode People Are People.
I was just watching one of your musical numbers.
When I was doing my musical musings. I'd like to think I was too, Cool Daddy, but I'm not that cool. And I don't even think I knew what I was about to break into.
I think it's a case of a stock clock's right twice a day, isn't it? I think you accidentally hit a couple of notes.
One thing you definitely need to know about me is my musical prowess is unique and not good. So, yes, Mike has a note just for my singing called H flat.
Yes, she's invented a new note.
Yeah.
Quite impressive.
Okay. We also have feedback from Win Italy 3173. I don't remember who said it, but it's so true. If you care about the characters, it doesn't matter how bad the effects and budgets are, it will succeed. But if you don't care about the characters, it doesn't matter how good the effects are or how much money is spent, it will fail.
Yeah,
it's very true.
That's a one-way street, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and it just, I think this show is absolute testament to that. The characters make it.
Yeah.
And it's just such compelling viewing.
And also, one thing about Babylon 5 that people don't talk about that much, and I think this is very much apparent in season 1, because people talk about the things that separate it from and make it unique. The story arc, the character reversals, the depth of world building. But the other element of it that makes it very rewatchable is just the fun 90s sci-fi-ness of it. The things that it does have in common with Star Trek and Sliders and all of those sort of shows is the fact that there was some sort of secret ingredient in the 90s. I don't know what it was that was a stylistic thing of the time that is kind of, for want of a better word, very innocent. And I think that adds to the appeal of it as well. And it is an X factor that a lot of those shows had, that Babylon 5 has, along with all of the other things that it does that are kind of unique and special. But all right, is that it? Should we get into it?
That's us.
All right, so we're going to hit pause. We are going to watch And the Sky Full of Stars, the 8th episode of season 1 of Babylon 5, and then we will come back and give you initially at least, non-spoiler review, and then if there's anything in there that we want to talk about from a spoiler perspective, which I suspect there might be, in this edition, we will signpost very clearly that if and when we move into spoilers. But we're going to hit pause, watch that now, and be back with you very soon.
I also, just before we go, just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has fed back to us.
Or feedback.
Feedback. It's really nice to see that there's a lovely little group of viewers who are getting back to us consistently. So
and it's growing as well.
It's really exciting.
I'm noticing, and this has never happened before with any of our rewatches, is our viewing and listening figures are actually growing as we go along. So that's good.
Yeah.
So tell your friends. Oh, and Mark, we have had your email your voicemail by the way. But because you're talking about this episode, we'll be playing it on the next Rewatch Project.
Don't worry, buddy. We'll be there.
And we are back. So we have just finished watching And the Sky Full of Stars from season 1 of Babylon 5, episode number 8. Hannah, initial thoughts?
I love episodes like this where there's not a lot of movement in terms of set. It's quite insular.
Shadow play.
Yeah, and just, great for character development and it's always the episodes where you find out loads more about what's actually going on.
This is what 90s sci-fi does very well.
It reminds me of what's the episode with the four lights?
Oh yes,
Star Trek.
Yeah, Chain of Command.
Chain of Command. It's that kind of thing, there's a whole heap of other things going on, but it's kind of in this quiet, airy space that the main story is happening.
It's theatrical.
Very much so. I loved it. And I find these episodes really good to sort of regroup a little bit, to sort of bring you back to main plot points and...
Yeah, the sort of Northern Star.
Yeah, main mysteries, things like that. Just reconfirm that there's bigger issues going on, not just, soul hunters and things like that.
And I think the show has really good instincts about how long to leave it before returning to the kind of Northern Star story.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, what's his face? O'Hare does a great job.
I thought he was actually really good in this episode.
Yeah. I mean, he can be a bit hammy when he's pretending.
No, but I thought the scene where he's really near the end, where he's really exhausted and he's talking to Night 2, I think it is. I don't know. I think and he's just sort of talking about what happened, and he's like, "You don't know what it's like. You weren't there." I thought he was great. That's it.
I thought he was great throughout this episode. He just, he does that kind of really stressed out, confused.
He's great when he does quiet intensity. That's his lane.
What about you?
Yeah, I really like this one. For similar reasons to you, I like the sort of theatricality of it. Right down to the fact that you've got an extremely kind of plummy British actor being a plummy British actor. Very stagey in the best way.
What did you see?
Yeah, and the fact that every time he talks about here in his head, he's like, here, and he does it. He points like this, but I think that I guess before getting into the opinion, there's a couple of things about this episode that are worth mentioning. First of all, the title. I love And the Sky Full of Stars. And I'd be curious to know if any viewers or listeners, if they know what the derivation of that is, because I thought part of me thinks it's a reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey. When he goes into the Stargate, he says it's full of stars. But the actual phrase, the terminology of that, because there's a Coldplay song, isn't there, called "Under Sky Full of Stars"? And I assume that Coldplay aren't naming it after this episode of Babylon 5.
That'd be pretty cool if they were, though.
But I looked online and I couldn't find, apart from the Coldplay song and the Babylon 5 title, I couldn't find that exact title anywhere else. It's Full of Stars was in 2001. So my guess is that it does come from somewhere else, and it feels very much like a Harlan Ellison title. Like he had these very prosaic titles, and Harlan Ellison is a technical advisor on the show as well, so I feel like it was maybe a note to him. But I love that. And the other thing as well I've got to mention is, and I'm sure I haven't listened to your voicemail yet, Mark, but I'd be very surprised if you didn't mention this, this is another example of the show really clearly referencing The Prisoner, the 1960s sort of surreal science fiction spy show starring Patrick McGoohan. Apparently they wanted Patrick McGoohan to play Night 2, and they couldn't get him. And then they went for Walter Koenig, who ended up playing Bester, obviously. And there's a lot of references to The Prisoner in this, right? The Prisoner is essentially, a character called Number 2, is spending the entire series trying to get some information out of the main character, played by Patrick McGoohan. And he uses all manner of shadow play and tricks. And the actor who plays Night 2, the aforementioned Plummy Brit, is very much, his acting style in this is very similar to The Prisoner, which being a 60s British TV show. So I think a lot of that is very referential. So I think, if a modern audience watch it now, they'll be like, oh, wow, look at this over-the-top stagey actor. But it's kind of designed to elicit that. And the actor himself, he's a guy who, he was in a bunch of like Hammer movies. He comes from that tradition. And I think that one of the things that's really enjoyable about Babylon 5, which you really don't see in any of the other 90s sci-fi shows, is how much of a love there is for British genre film and TV, whether that be Hammer or Space 1999 or Doctor Who or Blake 7 or Sapphire and Steel and these things.
Do you think that's got a lot to do with the fact that there's more stage actors in this?
Well, I think it all comes down to the fact that JMS was a fan of those shows, and I think he wants you to work with the actors who were in them. He's very much an Anglophile, like he loves Monty Python and the Beatles, and he's very into British culture, and that's why you see people like David McCallum and later David Warner, and a lot of people who were in Doctor Who and Blake 7 and the Hammer movies and The Prisoner, and a lot of these shows, in the same way that you see people like Walter Koenig and Majel Barrett, and the actor who played Khan's, number one in Wrath of Khan is Night 1 in this. So there's all of that stuff as well, which is really enjoyable. And we've seen other references to The Prisoner with Psychor and all of that. But I think, obviously, the thing that's most notable and enjoyable about this episode is how it enriches the mythology of the show.
Yeah.
How it gets back to that central mystery, which really hasn't been directly referenced since the pilot.
No.
There's been touches of it here and there. But this is the first time where they've really got back to it and examined it and reminded us what a mysterious character Delenn is. And I love 90s shows loved having that character who you weren't quite sure about. You had Skinner in the X-Files.
Yeah.
The kind of, they could go either way kind of characters. So I think that this was, and also it did that classic 90s sci-fi thing of going into the mind of characters, but the mind of a character look suspiciously like the available standing sets that the show's usually filmed in,
Yeah.
And they actually reference that. There's a great episode of Deep Space Nine of the 7th season where Section 31 go into Bashir's mind, and he's walking around the station, and he says to O'Brien, he's like, have you ever noticed how any time we go into someone's mind, it's always the station? It's like they got to know that. But no, I really enjoyed this because it had one of the things that I love about Babylon 5 is it's unapologetic about its sci-fi-ness. And I think a lot of shows now try to hide that. Not just sci-fi, horror. You'll hear films going, oh, this isn't a horror film. This is a meditation on grief. You'll hear things like that, or they'll elevate them above the genre because the genre's stupid, but they're not stupid. They're making a great piece of art.
Is this like men calling dieting biohacking?
Yeah, exactly. It's it's not Diet Coke. This is Coke Zero. It's got black packaging. It's badass.
What did they call water on Parks and Rec when they added fluoride to it?
Oh God, I can't remember, but it's one of those kind of like dude like branding,
H Dizzle or something.
Yeah. And but Babylon 5 is it's sci-fi. It's not even trying to hide it, and it embraces all of that, and it embraces the excesses of the genre as well, the theatricality, particularly in the first season as well, where they're still trying to kind of calibrate the show. And I love that. I love the fact that it's just willing to go big with the performances and enjoy the sort of the trappings of the genre.
I really like the fact that they don't rush anything. So, there's this mystery around what information Sinclair is missing, why the Minbari surrendered, and you think you're going to find out all of it at one point in this episode.
I'm actually surprised how much you do find out.
Yeah, but you think you're going to find out the whole kit and caboodle at one point, and then they show you a bit. They show you as much as they want to show you at this point, and they leave the rest up to speculation for now.
But they give you enough that the dynamics
it's just
between
ticking over. It's still ticking over.
Yeah, they give you enough that it will subtly alter the dynamics of the characters.
Yeah.
So now any interaction between Sinclair and Delenn will have a slightly different flavour to it.
But I think at this point in season 1, you need some ambiguity with Delenn because, she's been aside from the fact that you can see that there's something she knows that Sinclair doesn't, she's been pretty vanilla.
Yeah.
So it's good to see that there's complexity and layers to her.
That's a good way of looking at it, actually, because even I think a lesser showrunner would have had her acting really suspiciously. But I think that one of the really interesting shadings that Straczynski gives her, which you can only do when you truly have an auteur-driven show, is when you see her approaching Sinclair at the end, she genuinely has the demeanour of somebody who is caring and nurturing.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that a lot of people's instincts would have been to play up the suspiciousness of her. But I think that because this show is essentially made by one person, you don't get those dramatic misunderstandings that you sometimes get when you have a team of people doing it who might have slightly different interpretations of, is Bob a real entity or is he a metaphor for child abuse?
Yeah.
When it's one dude, it's completely consistent, And there's a lot to be said for both ways of doing it. Sometimes it is good to get different interpretations of things.
I think for something like this where there is so much detail and, there's a lot that we can't talk about until the end of the run of the show.
Yeah.
But, looking back on it, having watched the whole thing and looking back on it, the level of detail, I think it needs to be one person running it.
I mean,
You know?
I won't sort of get into it until we get to spoilers, but there's another newspaper shot in this episode as well.
Yeah.
And those things very much feel like they're designed for your rewatch. You know, like I can't see any real use for them when you're watching them for the first time beyond just, you know, colouring.
Yeah.
And also, you know, the fact that we're watching this in HD on a big TV. So, I mean, I don't even know how much you'd even have been able to have made it out in 1993.
Yeah.
You know, I think about what my TV was like.
Well,
you know,
I
30
even
years
think
ago.
about to back when we watched it together for the first time. That was lockdown.
Yeah.
You know, it's only 5 years ago, and
Well, that was a blurry old,
yeah, that was a blurry mess.
sort of like 20-year-old DVD.
I mean, that was even before I'd had the gin. It was a blurry mess.
Yeah. Okay, well, should we get into a couple of highlights
Sure.
from the episode?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we get the Plummy Brit and Joe Chim from Wrath of Khan rock up. And I think it's interesting because you've got all the stuff about...
I love that he holds a knife like a wand. Like he should have been in Harry Potter.
Yes, it is. Well, again, it's very, very, very British. If I'm surprised he wasn't, actually.
Well, he might have been.
Yeah.
I might just not have seen him.
I like the way as well that it's not immediately obvious that the gambling debt subplot is even connected to the main plot. You know, and we're so programmed by Star Trek to have, you know, them fighting the Borg, but also, you know, Data learning to dance or whatever, you know.
Xander fighting off multiple women while they save the world again.
Yeah, exactly. It's not obvious that and again, we've talked before about how in a different genre, Seinfeld was kind of revolutionizing the way that A plots and B plots interact with each other. The same year, you know, that this was on. And I think that that's something that was changing about television, was just this idea that the A plot and the B plot could actually be, you know, in concert with each other.
Yeah.
I love the hologram of Sinclair that they bring up. He's sort of like, he's doing his sort of, I love it when Sinclair does his kind of slightly Bob Munkhausian, you know.
Like, I'm really enjoying myself.
But I always remember, it's one of my clearest memories again of the Babylon 5 you mentioned, is that's what Michael O'Hare's really like. I remember Dan talking to him and him just being like, you know, like this kind of, he just had that kind of, I don't open doors, I just kind of ooze under them, you know, real smooth. And so
no one's smooth when you have to use the word ooze.
Well, it's, okay, smarmy. But kind of, I don't know, endearingly smarmy, if that's possible. We get a little bit of backstory about Franklin, where he talks about, he has the kind of what did you do in the war conversation with Delenn. And that's interesting.
Hitchhiking and seeing the world. And
yeah, no, but crucially about how he was, because he was a xenobiologist.
Oh, yeah, burning his notes.
Yeah, the fact that he were, you know, they were rounded up and of course, Delenn is evasive when he questions her as well. So that's a useful bit of writing, is it, that it fills out a bit of Franklin's backstory, but of course he's reminding us about the ambiguities surrounding Delenn, because that's obviously going to be...
She gave no tit for his tat.
We see Sinclair having a dream about the line, and I love the fact that you've got all of the kind of World War II cliches in there, haven't you? You know, Mitchell, pull up, damn it. You know, no, I'll be fine. You know, you bastards, I'll get you, and all that kind of stuff. And it's classic. I mean, I always think about...
It's like a one-man play.
It was theatre of the mind. But it reminds me of Airplane, you know, the parody movie. Or what was it called in New Zealand? It had a different name in New Zealand, didn't it?
Yeah.
Flying High, was it? Is that what
Flying High.
But in that, he was in the war, and he's always having these like flashbacks. Every time he gets on a plane, he has flashbacks to the war, and that was, again, that's a very 90s thing. But I do like the fact that, and I thought this was an interesting touch, that Sinclair kind of rejects his own guilt about it, and kind of calls, you know, Phantom Back from the Dead Mitchell out later, where he's like, you didn't listen, you never listen. And I like that because there's always this narrative about guilt and blame. But I like the fact that he's kind of like, no, you know what? It wasn't my fault. You know.
All I keep thinking is that would be like if I hallucinated you back, if you'd, like, I don't know, tripped over an open dishwasher door and slammed your head and
you'd give my ghost shit.
Yeah. And you'd be going, you know, that was totally your fault, and I'd be saying, you always leave the dishwasher door open. You're not going to use it. In fact, get your little ghost ass in that kitchen and clean up. And rinse the cloth out.
Yeah. I don't care if you're a ghost, I can still give you a weapon. So he wakes up and all of his comms are down, and he's in the aforementioned theatre of the mind in the station. And I don't think I've mentioned before, but that main corridor that you see him in, and it's a set they use a lot in the show, is a really great example of the creativity and the frugality of the production, because it's a really tiny corridor, but they just use forced perspective to make it look like it's going off. And when you actually see behind the scenes, it's a tiny room. It's literally just a room where there's a walkway, probably about as long as this table. And then it is literally just a painting that goes like that.
Yeah.
But when you shoot it with the right lens, it really genuinely looks like a gigantically long room. And
this is a bit like, you know, dads who pretend to go down the steps in the kitchen behind the kitchen bench.
The most convincing one of those I've ever seen is the actress Jane Lynch in, you know, the Paul Rudd film, Role Models.
Yeah.
She does that gag walking behind something, and it genuinely looks like she's walking downstairs. She's like a gifted pretending to walk downstairs. I remember doing that once for Chloe, and it absolutely blew her mind. She was just like, where are the stairs? And I was just like, ha ha.
As part of your head was still there.
Yeah. You've got to, it's all about selling it with the enthusiastic facial expression, like, I'm walking. Otherwise, you've really got to believe it. If you doubt for a second that you're actually walking downstairs, they can tell. So it's very, that adds to the theatricality, the fact that you've got these, these stage tricks. And
just can't stop think of you pretending to walk down.
I'll demonstrate after we've done this. I'm really good at it.
I didn't marry you for your mime skills.
Hey, what are you talking about? So we see Garrett. Shall I stop for a second?
Okay.
All right. So we see Garibaldi reading a newspaper, and I knew you had a bit more in you.
Sorry.
With white face paint and gloves. It is like. Oh my god.
Okay.
You right?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
I'm all good.
All right. Okay, good. I can tell. So we see Garibaldi reading a newspaper, and there's an article about how Psy-Corps have endorsed the vice president, and that's causing a bit of a kerfuffle.
The PSI Corps.
The PSI Corps, yeah. Delenn tells Garibaldi that Jeff Mann is missing.
Yeah.
And we see that he's in a simulation as well. And that's another great 90s thing as well, is because this was pre-Matrix, but in the early 90s, in the literary world, cyberpunk was just starting to come, like novels like William Gibson and a lot of the sci-fi writers who would go on to influence the Wachowskis when they made The Matrix. I love how the guy points to his head every time he says, I'm in here with you. And Mitchell appears, and this is where he tells him that he never listens. And
I'm surprised they didn't do half his face blown off or something.
Yeah. Totally, I can see that. And we see that he's clenching and unclenching his hand, and he's doing that to sort of stay cognizance. That's how he resists.
Yeah.
And so we see him amongst the Grey Council. And I think it's interesting as well, and this is one of the things that I think is really amazing about the writing on Babylon 5, is everything is always more than one thing. So here we've got the mystery about Sinclair and the Minbari and this missing 24 hours. But at the same time, the motivations for the guy finding out about it are also connected to this kind of xenophobic Earth first thing, which seems to also be connected a little bit to Psychor, who we're also seeing are somewhat connected to the government. So there's just this kind of increasing complexity to it.
And the kind of rationale of what happened that the knight gives Sinclair about, oh, well, they got you on board and they recruited you and they're trying to like take over Earth from within, and that's why this is happening and money's going here and this. Like, it's just fear-mongering.
Yeah, and also when he's saying things like, they saw that we could beat them and all that, it reminds me a lot of like 9/11 conspiracy people who can't accept the horrible reality and the unsettling reality that America could be attacked. So there's this psychological need to try and find
an inside job.
Yeah, make it this kind of big, complex thing when the reality is that just a small number of people did this thing. And often when people are drawn to conspiracy, it's an attempt to kind of reconcile and make sense of the nonsensical.
That's why
put order into a world of disorder.
Well, that's why there is a lot of conspiracies around COVID.
Yeah, it's because we couldn't accept that just this one random event in this one part of the world could have such an effect. We needed to place a narrative on it. And it's the same thing that happens with moral panics. It's like, the example I always use is the Bulger murder in England. That people had to blame movies and do all of this because you can do something, you can ban a movie. You can't get rid of people just being evil bastards. And
especially when it was two kids who had perpetrated the crime.
It's one of those things.
It was just unthinkable.
Yeah, exactly. I think that like 9/11, there are certain things that we simply just can't get our head around.
It's too horrible to imagine that people could cause something like that.
So what we do is we use stories to do that. And I think that that's what you see happening here is that there's an attempt to try and find a neat story or narrative that can explain this inexplicable thing.
Yeah.
And so he sees, this Night 2, I think it is, sees alien conspiracy and infiltration kind of everywhere in the shadows. I've got the note here about O'Hare is really good in this scene. I think he is when he's telling him off. He remembers that moment in the pilot where the Minbari says you've got a hole in your mind. And again, it's nice to see these early examples of, hey, we hadn't forgotten about it. That wasn't a random thing. We know what we're doing. It's signaling to the audience members that are really paying attention that this is going to be a show that you can potentially trust moving forward.
I think it's very much a move of you're in safe hands, luxuriate in the story. There's nothing to worry about. They've got this.
Yeah. And you see in the flashback him get tractor beamed in and strapped up in the Minbari ship and scanned. When he escapes, he's delusional, and Delenn goes to him and says, and he says, I know who you are. I like the fact that he keeps referring to Night 2 as the prisoner. I mean, he is a prisoner in the story, but I think they're having fun using that term as the callback for the show. And there's that kind of very much that William Gibson-esque Philip K. Dickish. That was the Dick move where he talks about maybe we're still in there. Yeah. And again, it's funny, like we think of that now as kind of a cliche, but I remember finding that pretty mind-blowing at the time because we hadn't had The Matrix. We'd had Total Recall. That was about, and Blade Runner. That was about it.
The one that really freaks me out like that was in DS9, the episode where...
where he's the writer.
Yeah, he's the sci-fi writer.
Because you see him again completely randomly, don't you?
Yeah.
Like something's happening and it just cuts to him writing it, and you're like, oh, gosh, I wasn't expecting him to go back to that.
Yeah.
And we see Sinclair lie to Delenn about not remembering.
Can't remember anything.
Then we see him saying, I'm going to find out. And obviously that's a mission statement.
Her colleague comes out from hiding.
Yeah, so he must never know.
He must never know, and if he finds out, kill him.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, Hannah?
Oh, just an absolutely solid episode and thoroughly enjoyable to watch again. Great acting by everybody, and just a thoroughly good time. A
good genre romp. Couple of quick bits of housekeeping before Hannah tells us what we're talking about next time and before we get into the spoilers. A reminder that we appreciate feedback, which you can send us at rewatchprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can just leave comments here on the YouTube channel. Also, likes and subscribes on YouTube, very much appreciated, as are positive reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you listen to the audio edition of this. Also, do check out our friend shows, namely Chinstroker versus Punter, The Good, the Bad and the Odd, Talk Without Rhythm podcast, Entertainment Landfill and Film Bastards, and also donations via PayPal, very much appreciated if you can afford to do so without causing yourself any financial hardship. Also, check out the other film, TV, music, and general pop culture related goodness that also cohabits with this YouTube channel. So what are we talking about next time, huh?
The next episode is called Death Walker. Synopsis says, a war criminal scientist who is the last of the notorious Dilgars is discovered on Babylon 5 bearing an extraordinary medication that all the powers want. Mm. It is directed by Bruce Seth Green and written by Larry DiTilio.
Hooray. All right, cool. All right, well, if you have not watched Babylon 5 before, we will say fare thee well to you now.
Bye-bye.
But if you have, stick around because we're going to do some spoilers in just about 10 seconds' time. And we are back. So I've got a couple of things, Hannah, but have you got anything you want to mention?
Oh, well, I'd say we've probably got the same thing, so you steer the conversation.
Yeah, one that sort of jumped out at me was all the stuff that Franklin tells Delenn. You get to see that because the prequel movie in the beginning, one of the major plots of that is Franklin getting pulled in and that whole business.
Yeah.
So it's so funny, but something that was just a line of dialogue in a early episode of the show gets fully fleshed out.
And I also thought in that sense about how, you know, he goes from hitchhiking around the galaxy to see stuff to traveling around Babylon 5.
Yeah, he goes on walkabout, doesn't he?
Yeah, to kind of have those experiences and
it's also fun
broaden his mind
that you get all of Delenn's side of the Battle of the Line also in the beginning. So it's funny because you see the moment, all of the stuff that's happening to Sinclair, you get her perspective on that as well. So that's one of the great things is that it's not just that Babylon 5 gives you the answers. You know, it's not like somebody's just going to read off a list. It's that when you do get the answers, they're dramatized in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just like, we'll show you what's in the box.
Yeah, no, it's fully fleshed out.
It's that what's in the box is this other really entertaining thing.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
So I think that a lot of that stuff around, you know, the Grey Council and, you know, obviously, you know, Sinclair is Valen. You know, there's that.
It was good to see the Grey Council finally get a little introduction.
And the fact that they've got it all there from the beginning, you know, there's 9 of them because you've got the worker class, the warrior caste, and the religious caste. You've got 3 of each, you know, 3, 3, 3, and how Babylon 5 is always about threes. You know, you've got the one who was, the one who is, the one who will be. Triangle imagery is used a lot in the show as well. So it's good to see how much of that is there at the beginning. And of course, all of the stuff with Psychor and the vice president, of course, is that what we don't know yet is that the vice president is going to there's going to be a coup, and Psychor all along were helping that. So the fact that we're getting this foreshadowed, and that all kicks off at the end of season 1 in the newspapers, and we're reintroduced to that dark-haired security officer again, who's solving the case with Garibaldi, because of course he's planted by Clark's people, and he's in place, ready, waiting for the assassination of the president. And so there's a lot of stuff in this episode that you wouldn't know.
No,
but you go back and watch it, and you're like, oh, okay.
They knew exactly what they were doing.
They're moving everyone into position, because at some point, in that season, they're going to all need to be at certain spots. So that's very satisfying to go back and watch. It really
is a chess game.
Yeah.
You know, he's always thinking a few steps ahead of where he is.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like me. All right, I think that's everything for this week. Well, for this edition.
Was there anything else? Oh, didn't you say when we were watching it, you were saying about the phrase that Morden says?
There's a sequence. There's a bit in the memory where Sinclair's saying, "What do you want?" and it just starts echoing, "What do you want? What do you want? What do you want?" And he's like, "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?" And what do you want is the question that the shadows ask. And who are you is the question that the Vorlons ask when they go out. So,
and the fact that they talk about it being shadow play as well, like it's all part of the larger story.
And a lot of it as well is because it's all written by one person. It's not just about all of the story beats being. It's just that artists have certain phrases and motifs that they like and that they favour and that they use a lot. So you get that consistency as well, and that's very appealing.
Yep.
But that's us for now then, I reckon. So we will be back with you very soon with Deathwalker. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
The next episode of Babylon 5. So we will see you again soon. Farewell.
See you later.